What if death wasn't the end? What if, at the brink of our final breath, there's something beyond the darkness, waiting to be discovered? Thousands of people worldwide have come face to face with death, only to return with extraordinary stories. These accounts, known as near-death experiences or NDEs, challenge everything we think we know about consciousness, life, and what lies beyond. Today, we're diving deep into the mysteries of NDEs. From mind-blowing scientific theories to chilling testimonies that will leave you questioning reality itself. We'll explore how these experiences not only blur the lines between life and death, but also force us to ask, is there more to existence than what we see? For centuries, humanity has grappled with the question of what happens after we die. From religious beliefs about the afterlife to existential debates, the idea of life after death has been central to nearly every culture. Some envision a paradise, others speak of reincarnation, while materialists argue that death is the ultimate end, a void of nothingness. In the next few moments, we'll challenge the limits of science and explore if death is simply a door to something more. To understand near-death experiences, we need to start with what science tells us about death and consciousness. Traditionally, biology views the brain as the control center for everything we think, feel, and experience. When the heart stops and the brain loses oxygen, consciousness is believed to fade into nothingness. This is the standard view. Death is the end. However, NDEs present an anomaly to this narrative. People who have been declared clinically dead, no heartbeat, no brain activity, return with vivid memories of what they experienced during that period. This defies conventional science. How can someone have clear visions, out-of-body experiences, and even heightened senses when their brain shows no signs of activity? Some scientists believe these experiences are the brain's final moments of activity, hallucinations triggered by chemicals flooding the brain as it shuts down. Others point to psychological factors like the brain's need to construct comforting images to ease the fear of death. This dying brain hypothesis tries to explain NDEs as nothing more than an illusion caused by lack of oxygen, medication, or even electrical bursts as neurons collapse. However, there are serious gaps in these explanations. Many patients who experienced NDEs accurately described events happening around them while they were technically dead, events they couldn't have possibly seen or heard. Some even described floating above their body, watching doctors work frantically to revive them. This leads us to a bigger question. Could consciousness exist beyond the physical brain? We see a tug-of-war between traditional biology and these unexplained phenomena. Despite numerous studies, there's still no clear answer. Could the brain, as we know it, simply be a receiver for something much larger, a consciousness that continues even after the body dies? We'll explore this theory in the next section, but before that, I want to ask, do you believe consciousness is tied to our brain, or could it exist independently? This is just the beginning of our journey into the unknown. Let's now dive into one of the most intriguing intersections of science and mystery, quantum theory. You may have heard of quantum mechanics, the branch of physics that studies particles at the smallest scale. But what does this have to do with consciousness? It turns out, quite a lot. At the quantum level, particles behave in ways that seem impossible according to the laws of everyday physics. They can exist in multiple places or states at once, a phenomenon known as superposition. And what's even stranger is that they only seem to choose one state when they're observed. This has puzzled scientists for decades and suggests that reality might be more complex than we think. Now, some scientists believe that consciousness itself might have a quantum aspect. This means our minds wouldn't just be tied to our physical brain. Instead, consciousness could be part of the fundamental fabric of the universe, much like space, time, and energy. Here's where things get really interesting. A theory called quantum consciousness suggests that the brain might act like a kind of receiver, picking up signals from this deeper, universal consciousness. In other words, our mind might not be confined to our brain, it could extend beyond it. Physicist Sir Roger Penrose, a Nobel Prize winner, is one of the leading figures behind this idea. He suggests that tiny structures in our brain cells called microtubules might be where these quantum processes happen. If true, this could explain how consciousness might survive even when the brain shuts down, potentially continuing after death. This theory connects directly with what we hear in many NDE stories. People often describe floating above their bodies, watching doctors work to revive them, or seeing things in other rooms, at times when their brain was supposedly inactive. If consciousness were limited to the brain, how could these experiences happen? Of course, not everyone agrees with this theory. Critics argue that these experiences could just be illusions created by the brain as it dies. But if that's the case, how do we explain the detailed, accurate descriptions of events and locations far away from the person's body? Quantum mechanics shows us that reality is far more mysterious than we once thought. It opens up the possibility that our consciousness might not be bound to our physical body and could interact with the universe in ways we're just beginning to understand. So, could quantum theory hold the key to understanding the true nature of our mind and what happens after we die? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think consciousness is more than just brain activity? Now let's look at some of the most compelling evidence that supports the idea of consciousness surviving death. The testimonies of those who have had near-death experiences, NDEs. There have been thousands of documented cases of people who were clinically dead, meaning no heartbeat, no brain activity, yet returned to life with astonishing stories about what they encountered while they were gone. These stories come from people of all backgrounds, ages, and belief systems, and while the details sometimes vary, the core elements of these experiences are strikingly similar. While many NDEs share similar elements of peace and light, there are also experiences that defy expectations, particularly those involving people with disabilities, terrifying NDEs, and encounters that seem to reach beyond religious or spiritual boundaries. One of the most striking aspects of NDEs is the transformation that occurs in people who, during their experience, overcome physical disabilities. Take the case of Vicky Noratu, a woman who was blind from birth. Vicky had no concept of sight. She had never seen colors, shapes, or light. Yet, during a car accident that left her in a critical condition, Vicky experienced an NDE in which she left her body and found herself suddenly able to see. She vividly described the scene in the hospital room, the doctors working to save her life, and even details about her own body lying on the operating table. Upon waking, she could no longer see, but she retained a powerful memory of the vision and the sensation of sight, despite never having physically experienced it before. Cases like Vicky's challenge the materialistic view that consciousness and perception are purely products of the brain, as her experience of sight, despite never seeing before, challenges what we know about consciousness. Similarly, there are accounts of individuals who were disabled or physically impaired before their NDEs, only to find themselves whole and healed in the otherworldly dimension they visited. For instance, some NDE survivors who had lost limbs or were paralyzed reported regaining full use of their bodies during their experience, only to return to their physical limitations once they revived. This phenomenon suggests that, in the realm beyond, the soul exists in a state of wholeness and perfection, unburdened by the physical ailments of the earthly body. For many, this experience is deeply comforting, as it hints at the possibility that suffering is only temporary, and that beyond the physical world lies a state of peace and completeness. While many NDEs describe peaceful, even euphoric experiences, not all encounters with death are positive. There are also negative and terrifying NDEs that stand in stark contrast to the commonly reported feelings of love and light. One famous example is that of Howard Storm, an atheist and former art professor, who experienced what he described as a journey into hell during his NDE. After suffering from a perforated stomach in 1985, Storm was rushed to the hospital, where his body went into critical condition. During this time, he reported being taken by malevolent beings to a dark, cold place. He described feeling intense fear and hopelessness as these beings tormented him, dragging him deeper into the abyss. Just as he was about to lose all hope, he called out to God, and in that moment, a beam of light appeared, lifting him out of the darkness and into a realm of love and safety. This harrowing experience completely transformed Storm's life. He abandoned his previous atheism and became a pastor, dedicating his life to spiritual service and sharing his story. Such dark NDEs are less common but are still reported in about 4% of cases. These experiences often involve feelings of dread, isolation, and suffering, sometimes described as eternal punishment or judgment. In some cases, individuals report encountering demonic beings or feeling trapped in a void. These negative experiences challenge the comforting idea that all NDEs lead to peace and joy, instead introducing the possibility that what we encounter after death might be shaped by our actions, beliefs, or unresolved fears. This brings us to a connection with spiritual and religious beliefs, which often shape how NDE survivors interpret their experiences. In many Western societies, where Christian beliefs dominate, individuals like Howard Storm often frame their NDEs in the context of heaven and hell, with the presence of divine figures like Jesus Christ or angels being common elements in their stories. For example, another famous case involves Dr. George Ritchie, who during his NDE in 1943 described being guided by a Christ-like figure through various realms of existence, from earthly life to heavenly dimensions. On the other hand, in cultures with deeply rooted beliefs in reincarnation and karma, NDEs are often viewed through the lens of spiritual cycles and rebirth. For example, in Hinduism and Buddhism, where the concept of samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth, is central, many NDE survivors report encounters that align with these beliefs. Some people describe entering a realm where they meet spiritual guides or deceased ancestors who help them review their life and understand the karmic consequences of their actions. They are often told that they must return to life to fulfill their spiritual purpose or to resolve unfinished karma. One particularly fascinating case is that of Anita Morjani, who, after a long battle with cancer, slipped into a coma and was given just hours to live. During her NDE, she said she entered a space of infinite love and understanding, where she realized that the fear and guilt she had carried in her life had contributed to her illness. She encountered spiritual beings who told her it was not her time to die and that she still had work to do. Upon returning to her body, she experienced a miraculous recovery. Her cancer disappeared, baffling her doctors. Morjani's story illustrates the transformative power of NDEs and how they can be interpreted as a second chance to heal and live life with a deeper understanding of love, purpose, and karma. Another profound case involves Dannion Brinkley, who has had multiple NDEs throughout his life. His first occurred after being struck by lightning. He described leaving his body and entering a tunnel of light, where he was greeted by spiritual beings who showed him a panoramic review of his entire life. Brinkley recalled feeling the emotions of every person he had ever hurt, which filled him with deep remorse. This life review, common in many NDEs, seems to resonate with the idea of karma, the notion that our actions have consequences, not only in this life but possibly in the next. After his NDE, Brinkley dedicated his life to helping others, particularly those in hospice care, which he saw as a way to make amends and live more in alignment with his newfound spiritual purpose. These examples of personal transformation are central to the lasting impact of NDEs. Most survivors report a profound shift in their worldview after returning to life. They often describe feeling more connected to spiritual truths, valuing love, compassion, and kindness over material success. Many lose their fear of death entirely, seeing it not as an end, but as a transition to another state of being. This aligns with the teachings of many spiritual traditions, which emphasize that death is not something to be feared, but embraced as a part of the soul's journey. Even those who have terrifying NDEs often experience positive changes after their ordeal. Howard Storm, for example, completely transformed his life, moving from atheism to spirituality and devoting himself to the service of others. These transformations are not just limited to a change in belief systems. Many NDE survivors report a heightened sense of purpose and clarity, often shifting careers or dedicating themselves to charitable causes. They also frequently report increased empathy and emotional sensitivity, feeling a deep connection to all living beings. What do these NDEs tell us about the nature of reality? Are they simply the result of a dying brain, firing off in its final moments? Or are they glimpses into a broader, more complex existence that awaits us after death? Medical professionals and scientists remain divided on the issue, but the growing body of evidence, especially the consistency of these experiences across cultures and belief systems, is difficult to ignore. Perhaps the most important takeaway from NDEs is not necessarily what they reveal about death, but what they teach us about life. Almost every person who has undergone an NDE comes back with a greater appreciation for the present moment. They often report living more mindfully, cherishing their relationships, and striving to live in a way that is aligned with love, compassion, and empathy. These experiences suggest that while death may be inevitable, life is a precious gift, one that should be lived to its fullest, with kindness, purpose, and a deep connection to others. Let me know what you think. Have you ever heard of an NDE that changed your perspective on life or death? As the number of NDE reports grows, healthcare professionals are beginning to address these experiences with more care and openness. In many hospitals, especially in palliative care and hospice settings, doctors and nurses are now trained to provide emotional support to patients who recount NDEs. Rather than dismissing these stories as hallucinations, more medical staff are recognizing their therapeutic value. For many patients nearing the end of life, discussing NDEs brings peace and can alleviate their fear of death, helping them and their families cope with the uncertainty of dying. Healthcare workers are also learning to communicate these experiences to families, offering a sense of hope that their loved ones may experience comfort in their final moments. NDEs are now part of the holistic care approach in many palliative settings, and recounting such experiences can bring a sense of closure to both patients and families. From a research perspective, the field of consciousness studies is evolving. Tools like fMRI and EEG are being used to study brain activity during cardiac arrest, the moment when many NDEs occur. While research is still inconclusive, these tools provide new insights into the relationship between brain activity and consciousness, sparking more discussions about what may lie beyond death. It's important to acknowledge that while science has made incredible advances in understanding the brain and the body, it still struggles to fully explain NDEs. Part of the difficulty lies in the fact that NDEs are subjective experiences. Unlike observable phenomena in the physical world, NDEs happen within the consciousness of individuals, making them difficult to study with traditional scientific methods. Furthermore, many of the proposed physiological explanations for NDEs, such as anoxia, neurotransmitter release, or misfiring neurons, do not account for the full range of experiences reported. For instance, How can someone perceive events happening outside their body, sometimes in distant locations, while they are clinically dead? How can they describe meeting deceased loved ones or seeing events from the past and future with such clarity? Additionally, the transformative effects of NDEs are difficult to explain from a purely biological perspective. How can a brain that is supposedly malfunctioning or shutting down produce experiences that lead to such profound personal and spiritual changes? If NDEs were simply the result of brain chemicals or dying neurons, we would expect them to be disorienting or chaotic. Yet, survivors often describe them as more real than waking life, with a sense of purpose, love, and clarity that leaves lasting impacts. The debate continues, but the psychological and spiritual impact of these experiences is undeniable. NDEs challenge us to ask profound questions. What happens after death? Is there something beyond this life? And how do these possibilities shape how we live? Whether approached from a scientific or spiritual lens, NDEs invite us to explore the mysteries at the core of human existence. What do you think? Are NDEs just the brain's last illusion, or do they offer a glimpse into something greater? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you or someone you know has experienced an NDE, we'd love to hear your story. And remember, one day, we'll each face the same mystery. Perhaps the most important truth lies in how we choose to live now.
In the darkness, hearts beat with a somber sound. Voices barely whisper.